Let's talk a little bit about the impact of coronavirus on kind of the corporate debt situation. Right?
That's a great question.
So one of the things that I saw in China, I was reading that these Chinese companies are levered to the fucking head with all this debt. If there's an economic slowdown, even a little stalling of the economy, all of a sudden they can't pay the debt. You have to have the government, a bank, somebody has to step in. There's all kinds of ramifications. How do you look at that? Let's start with the U.S. and then maybe globally.
Look, so step back from a macro perspective, define the bubble, the biggest part of the bubble that we're in now. It's the corporate debt bubble.
Okay.
There is a mechanism behind that that is very important for people to understand. So where does this debt come from? It comes from American companies issuing debt. Why are they issuing debt? They're issuing debt to buy back their own shares. It's an accounting trick. And to make it worse, they're issuing themselves, the management team, stock options. Then they, at the board, they then say, right, and how many shares should we buy back today? Guess what? If you're removing the number of shares, your share price goes up in normal circumstances. So they're making themselves rich by basically raping the shareholders. The shareholders have an optical illusion because the price is going up, but actually all these corporations are taking more and more debt. IBM has been a classic example of that. So that's that mechanism of where the debt comes from. Now, the buyer of that debt is the pension system, because there's a bunch of these poor baby boomers getting close to retirement who don't have enough savings, so they look for any yield they can. So corporate debt has a bit more yield than government bonds, and it's deemed safe. Mm-hmm. So we'll just buy as much of that as you can give us, and that is being driven by all of these pensions didn't have enough returns over the last 40, 50 years, so the state pensions, the states have raised taxes and are putting the tax money into these pensions, and that tax money, as it comes in every month out of people's wages, buys these corporate bonds. So you've got this lovely environment where the 1% are getting extremely rich, the corporations are issuing more and more debt and buying back their shares. They are the only buyer of equities. If you look on aggregate, almost everybody else is a net divestor of equities in the world. There's a bit of foreign buying, that's it. The entire pension system is trying to divest of equities, but it's still switching to credit. But as every baby boomer leaves the workforce, it eventually starts moving out. So the entire world is a net seller of equities, but the corporations are the buyers. And we've just had one of the biggest stock market bubbles of all time. Then on the other side, we've had the biggest credit bubble of all time. The corporations are now, because of this ridiculous tax rule, are now corporate debt to GDP is the highest it's ever been in history. And the issue is there is only one buyer of that credit, which is the pension system, really, because even yields are too low for half the insurance companies and stuff. But let's say it's insurance companies and these pension companies. When you go into recession, or just the business cycle goes negative, just a normal one, forget the depression scenario, just a normal recession, as a company, your cash flows go negative. And your earnings go negative, right? Standard.
Pretty obvious.
Yeah. Well, that means you stop buying back your shares because you don't have the cash flow to buy your shares. Mm-hmm. So that means that the moment you go into recession, which is where we're going now, just when you need it the most in illiquid markets, the world's largest buyer of equities leaves. And there are no baby boomers buying equities. Mm-hmm. There's no millennials buying it. There's nobody to offset this.
Would it be fair to say that the structure you just described...
Hold on, let me finish the other side of the structure.
Right.
The other side of the structure is tax receipts are driven by the business cycle. So when tax receipts go negative, when the business cycle goes negative, and therefore there's no buying in the state pensions of the corporate debt either. So what you have is at the very same time, as soon as the business cycle goes negative, give it a month or two of lag, basically the buyer of credit leaves, the buyer of equity leaves, and there's no buyers. Mm-hmm. At the same time, you have this huge amount of these triple B credits, which are huge old companies that have issued so much debt that they've been downgraded that could get knocked into junk. Mm-hmm. If they get knocked into junk status, they will leave these credit portfolios and have to go and jump bond portfolios. Problem is, there's 4 trillion of these bonds. So the numbers are too big for the junk bond market to absorb. So the junk bond market will just basically seize up. And to accommodate it, yields will have to explode. When there's no buyer, I need to get that across. There is no buyer of this stuff, and there is no buyer of equity, which means that the share price of General Electric, Ford, and all of these triple Bs get pummeled, which increases the chance of a downgrade, which increases the chance of them being. So what you've got, I call it the doom loop, and I feel like we're just about to set that off, and credit is the next big thing.
So this structure that you just described, how we've kind of gotten here, there's two key components to it. The first is the 1% got really, really rich during this run. We have seen an explosion of CEOs and C-suite executives walking through the door. They're leaving.
Yeah.
And they're not leaving because they think it's going to get a better situation. They've kind of made a lot of money, and now seems to be a good time. Even to the point of seeing somebody like a Bob Iger do it overnight, effective immediately. Right? This isn't a, hey, I'm going to leave in 6 months or in a year. This is, I was going to leave, in a year or two. Now I'm leaving today. Is that what it looks like? Is it that these executives understand kind of the situation you're describing, and it's always better to leave at the top, kind of walk out with the championship trophy than wait till it's a bad situation?
Yes. And I was just chatting to a friend of mine last night who's just sold his business, which is an investment banking business. He's just sold it. Now, why has he held it on for 10 years? Why does he just sell it now? Another friend of mine sold his audiovisual business. Why now? And it's because they kind of know.
Now's a good time.
Now's a good time. Look, we all think we can time it, and we can't. But these guys kind of know that, particularly at that level of C-suite, because it's overrun by baby boomers. So let's assume that most of these people are 65 to 70, or 60 to 70. That's the cohort of the C-suite of corporate America. Well, you're about to go into retirement. You just don't want to deal with this. I mean,
and because really there's an 18 to 24 month period, let's say that's a recession or a depression, right? It's really, really bad for most people. And then you'll get a recovery, similar to how we've seen in other situations. But that recovery, just to get back to the same level you were, could take years, if not.
Well, it doesn't work if you're a retiree. So it's different if you're young. If you're young, it's like, okay, this is going to be one of the war stories that you will have, like I have, and come on a podcast in 20 years' time with the war stories, right? That's fine. There are opportunities. There'll be opportunities to make money. I think there's a whole new financial system coming out of this, and we'll get into that later. But for the baby boomers, the problem is they can't buy the dip because they're retiring. So you're going to, let's say the average recession, not a really bad one, average recession, lowers share prices by about 40%, maybe 50. Well, you're incentivized to sell because you want to crystallize your losses. And I've seen this firsthand from friends of mine and parents, 2001, 2008. The thing is, oh shit, protect my pool. I will just make the wrong decision, but I have to sell. I cannot see my money go down even less, because then I'm going to run out and be bankrupt when I'm old. If I'm bankrupt at 80 years old, I'm totally fucked. So they're incentivized. Behavioral incentive is I have to sell. So that is inherently built into the system. The pension system is implicitly a put as well, because they have to deliver returns to these retirees. Now the problem is if they've allocated too much to equity, and they're going to have to pay entitlements to these people in 2 years' time, well, somehow they're going to have to sell that equity to pay that entitlement. And the more yields fall, I mean, nobody's talking about this yet, but this yield fall from 2% to 1% basically means you need twice as much money to live off the yield. As it goes to zero, you can never have enough money to live off yield, so you have to have capital gains. That completely screws up all pension calculations.
Does this lead to the blow up? Do we see pensions blow up in major ways?
Listen, I've been talking about this for a long time. Everybody's going to have to understand the reality that their pension is not what they think it is.
What does that mean, though?
It means two things.
Not what they think it is? Is that a zero?
They think it's a promise.
Okay.
And a guarantee. What it's not, it is not that.
Okay.
You will not get, even if you're a fireman or a teacher or somebody who's worked all their life and you've been told you will get 2/3 of your final salary, that will not happen. You may be lucky and be one of the first ones. Your benefits may get cut later. We've seen it everywhere happen the same. So that promise is not real. So your dreams of retirement are dreams in terms of what you think, and nobody's got enough. The other reality is nobody has enough to retire on. It's the numbers will not work unless you're one of the 1%, because if you look at the average, not the average, the median baby boomer, because the average is so skewed by the ultra rich. If you look at the median baby boomer, they got like $200,000. I mean, they basically can last 5 years. What does that mean for the world? So this is why I'm particularly worried about this confluence of events. So going into the recession, fine. Then the coronavirus. No, sorry, let's go back. Going to recession, fine. You've always got the kindling of this debt issue, the massive corporate debt bubble. You've got an equity market bubble. Okay, we can kind of deal with that, but that's like 2008 and 2001. It's kind of a hybrid. When you put the coronavirus on top and you accelerate it all, and then you've got the pension issues with no pensioners being able to afford to retire, and think what that does to GDP coming out of a recession. It never recovers. And nor does the stock market, because there's no buyer. So we go into a very different world. Now, can we again extrapolate more concerning events to the financial system at the end of this? You know, how do insurance companies survive the medical insurance stuff? What happens? And the point being is, in part of this, there's a story that I've talked about a lot, is the shortage of dollars in the world. And in this situation, that could become a problem as well.